this panel discussion. We have a list of questions which this panel is going to be addressing. The questions were given to us by a Women's Week committee, and we'll be going through these, and I'll be asking them of the panel members, and we'll ask that you hold your questions for the last 10 or 15 minutes. Unless, of course, you just can't stand it. You better raise your hand, and then we'll be glad to take them. This week is focusing upon women, art, and power. This panel, however, will be focusing primarily upon the visual arts and not the performing and literary arts. However, if the panelists and the artists may choose to incorporate questions and responses, including various art forms, but primarily we'll be dealing with visual arts. The panel will be discussing the selling of artwork and the acquisition of artwork, exhibiting in commercial galleries and museums, and how to combine and utilize teaching and art skills. I'd like to introduce our panel members. Louise Now is a renowned author and art collector, and we're very pleased to have her on our panel today. This is like living with the legend of art in Iowa, I think. Very, very pleased. Jessica Rowe is the Associate Director for the Des Moines Art Center, and she's been with Garrett for about 4 years. And she was also came to Iowa and was the director of the Fort Dodge Museum the Gladden Museum in Fort Dodge, and really helped Iowa mature in its art world. Our last panelist is Brenda Jones, and Brenda is an artist as well as a faculty member in the Art and Design Department here at Iowa State. Okay. The topic today is art opportunities. And I thought, well, that sounds so simple. It's like you can reach out and grab it, put it in your pocket, so this is a great opportunity, a way to go. And sometimes it is that simple, and sometimes it is that direct. But we do come to the arts down different paths and avenues. Some have different roadblocks, different opportunities. As we begin, I would like to ask each of these panel members how they came to the arts and how has art in their life become integrated. And I'll forewarn you, we've not rehearsed any of this. I'm going to start out with Brenda.
Sure. Actually, I started doing art when I was 7. And my father introduced me to it. He worked at Tinker Air Force Base, and he would bring home books of Michelangelo and Piero della Francesca. So this was my first introduction. And I just fell in love with it. It was nothing I wanted to do except to do the art. I've been doing it since the age of 7. I was extremely fortunate. I went from the 7th grade through high school with a woman who actually had a master's degree in math. She was the art teacher. And this woman really pushed me. I looked at people like Augusta Savage because I did love sculpture at the time. I looked at Matisse because I loved flatness of forms. Oklahoma University, when I was 15, commissioned me to do some pieces for them, a mural. It was just wonderful. I was pushed with the Cowboy Hall of Fame, if you don't know what that is, the National Museum. And it was sensational. I was very fortunate. I traveled around the country. I went to school in Rome through Tyler. And that was really just, I can't tell you how I embraced that because I got an opportunity to see a show of Kandinsky's, a retrospect. If you don't know who this is, an abstract artist whose work really hit me. At the same time, I was really concerned with the figure, which Michelangelo was always very important to me. Because I love what he told the Pope when he told him, I'll be finished when I'm finished with my life. That's guts. And to look at his work and look at the struggle there, and then to turn around and look at Kandinsky and think about someone like Augusta Savage. If you don't know who this woman is, she's a very famous African-American artist that has always been a part of my life. And Pearl White is another artist, and Jacob Lawrence. These are people that were great influences for me. I've never wanted to do anything else but paint. I thought at one time to dance would be wonderful, to be a ballerina, but I was too clumsy, and it just didn't work out with the art. So I decided to initiate music with color. So there's a lot of different reasons why I do the art. The teaching part comes natural, I think. I think it's very important to me, for me, I should say, to give back what I've been given, the knowledge that I've been given. And this is the means of doing it. I am one of those very individual people, very opinionated people when it comes to expressing my work. I think it should be balanced analytically. At the same time, I am one of those people who figures that what I have to say will be universal because it will come from within. If you have any type of humanity, you'll be able to come from an individual. If not, there's nothing I can do about it because the individual will look at the work and judge for themselves. So it makes a little bit of a difference for me. But that's it. I'm sorry.
Jessica, how did your art opportunities come along in your life?
It was my mother who introduced me to art as a little girl, going to museums and growing up around Washington, D.C. And I always knew that I wanted to pursue a career in art. High school, we moved to Buffalo, and the Albright Knox was a big influence, and going there on weekends and wherever I could get money to take the bus in. I majored in studio art in college and went on to graduate school, and it was most of the difficulty of not knowing how to survive, and that I chose a career in museums, but also not also wanting to teach at the time, and there were very little options at that time. So I entered a program at Syracuse University in museum work, and went more into the research aspect in art history, and followed that with a year in Florence and studying there, and then coming back to the States. I've worked in museums for about 17 years now. Again, I thought at first that I would pursue a career in visual art, studio art, and I have no regrets in pursuing a career in museum work because of my relationship with artists and working with different artists, and also working with people and staying within that medium. Pretty things to be around today.
Well, we used to have many opportunities for the arts.
Well, I was thinking as the other two panelists were talking, I wish I had been that directed in my life, self-directed. I didn't know what I wanted or who I was or what I wanted to do, but my mother was an artist. And so she sent me to art school when I was in grade school, and she encouraged me to be a museum and all this kind of thing. When she finally decided that making an artist out of me was a hopeless cause, she said, well, why don't you be an art historian? And so I thought, that's a good idea. Because I do that with my head, not with my hands. That works much better. So after I graduated from college, I didn't take a single art. I did one semester of art in college, which showed that I was not really hold the staff of the English history. And I suppose if I hadn't been so guided by my mother, would have been a historian. Well, I ended up as a historian of the women's movement, so I did cover that. But I went to graduate school at Harvard and got a master's degree in art history and museum training, that kind of thing. And then got out of school when women were told to go home and get married, so that's what I did. And instead of being a professional in the field, I've been an amateur and volunteer. Most of my life, I've done a few professional things at the Boyd Art Center. I've enjoyed thoroughly. And so along the way, I was collecting a little of this, a little of that, different. My taste has changed over the years, but I had no focus really for what I was collecting until the women's movement came along, and I began really to think, well, here I am, an acting feminist and a collector of art, and I better have two women in my collection. And what started out with that intention, eventually I got so involved with it that I traded off a lot of the art I had in order to buy art by women, and that's how I came to be a collector of women's art.
I think it's important to hear that women or people come to art in various ways. Often, though, it becomes your core passion, whether you're trained in it or families encourage it or you find it. And I think that's an important thing. As the students come, at least over to our offices, often they ask about what led you to to the arts, and sometimes it's not always structured, sometimes it is on some of those back roads, and especially talking to students, there's not a great deal of history about it, and I hope you seek it out. At least in my generation, it was something that no one said you could be a musician, or a museum person, an artist, or whatever. Just kind of follow your own road. I encourage you to do those as well. My next question is, what is the state of women's art? And would you address yourself either locally, nationally, or internationally? And I know that that's a very broad and wide open question. Jessica, do you want to have a comment on that?
Well, I think the general atmosphere has improved, certainly over the past 10, 15 years. What strikes me about that question are the challenges it faces all of us today, men and women, and that is a survival. Survival for artistic integrity and quality and connoisseurship in an environment that really is of a bottom line era, financially driven. And I think the challenge of working in a museum, an art museum, is that aspect of it, is trying to maintain that integrity and a vision when it comes down to economics. It seems to be that more and more.
Louise, do you have a thought on that?
Well, I guess I want to question your question. What do you mean by women's art?
I think we probably defined it.
How are you talking about art by women?
Yes, we're talking about art by women. Thank you.
Well, I think the women's movement has certainly made people more conscious of women in the art world, but I think women are still faced with the same problems. They've always been faced with that it's a male-oriented world, and still is. That women have the problems of often managing families, the same. All women seem to battle or talk about equality and sharing and this kind of thing. As women that have double duty, so that sometimes they're delayed in their career or even sidetracked. I think there are women like you in Chicago who are really political artists, and as she said, a lot of art is political. We really don't think of it as political, but there are other women who are really strong feminists, but their art doesn't express it quite in the same way as in Chicago. And Mary Shapiro and some of those people, Mary Shapiro puts women's lace and other things belonging to women in her paintings to bring out, but she calls them feminishes. It's hard to generalize on what's happening to women. I really hesitate to do it, but I think we have a long way to go.
Do you think that it's changing? Do you think this notion of feminist art is changing the idea, or is that term even fading away? Are women still attached to feminist art or art by women?
Well, if you're going to use the feminist as subject matter in art, making the art, that's one thing. That is very extremely political, wrong with political. For myself as an artist painting, the subject matter that I quite naturally going to paint a lot of times about yourself. I am a figurative painter, so I have a lot to say about what I feel, because I've been fortunate to see a lot, to understand some things in life. I think this is, as an African American, and 87% of the populace is below the poverty level, and I've had a very hard time in trying to adjust to museums and galleries, traditional museums and galleries. I've been I've been in a state of denial, in a way, when it comes to approaching these places. So when I was in New York, I went to a lot of galleries, and I began to realize here's a Swedish gallery, here's an African American gallery in Harlem. In Spanish Harlem, you have a Spanish gallery. And it was just so segregated. And then you have women galleries, and a lot of times, even then, on that approach, there was still this resistance because of the color of my skin. So there was this big issue for me on being creative and what I had to say and subject matter wise and where I wanted to produce this art and how I wanted to produce it. a lot of it has been very personal. Feminist, to me, is subject matter, and it is a very explosive political subject matter. I think it's as explosive as the Renaissance, if not even more so, because it's like a universal door to open up things. And if I want to paint a message, a subject that will deal with that type of reality for me, then I will do it. And I think this is something that women have been subjected to, have been pushed aside, because we have this tendency to put labels on art, you know, and it's like, well, you're an African American artist. I am an African American, I'm an African American artist doing art. There's a distinction there. And that's extremely important. And until we get to that ground, I think when I looked at your work, I thought it was just an extremely powerful influence, an image that would push me to make art. Give me that thrust. I didn't care who or what the forms were. What did it do for me? How did it excite me? That's extremely important for an artist to understand, especially young artists and women. What you have to say is important. I don't care how you say it well. And how the spectator or the viewer observes it, totally different story. Everyone will take it. But if it comes within you, from you, it should be something you have to say. I mean, it's a corn patch, do it. Just make art. It's extremely important.
There are different definitions. It depends on point of view. Traditionally, women's art, I mean, when I was growing up, women's art was pink and blue. Sunsets, bouquets of flowers, things that those were defined as women's art. And I think that if a woman did anything else, it was, it was just really breaking out of the mold. And there were women doing other things before. But that's the reason I think we can distinguish between women's art and feminist art, and then and all of them are artists, but with different slants.
I also think the state of women's art is dependent upon the bigger picture of what's happening in our community or in the world around us. And the more we see women becoming part of this world, in the corporate sector, in the private sector, more visible, I think that has an impact on women's art, on the way one perceives a woman, whether whatever she's doing, but it gives it empowers her, it strengthens, I think, what women can do, and they can do anything.
I think there's a perception that, generally that if I have a collection of art by women, and I'm almost afraid to go to the dealer and say I have a collection of art by women. Well, we just don't make any distinctions. Well, they generally don't make any distinctions with the thing distinguish mostly male artists. But I remember when Albert Wilkie, who was former director of the University of Iowa Museum, came, I had just acquired some wonderful Russian pictures by women in Russia. And he came up and looked around and said, well, these are good.
Please talk a little bit how you developed the collection, how you found the focus, and where do you find the works to put in your collection?
Well, I find them every place. I guess I have Iowa artists, people like Amy Wilson, who's here, printmaker. I've got one of the things that really excited me was to find the Russian avant-garde women and the really wonderful things they were doing. And carried from, say, 1905 to 1930. Just an outburst of avant-garde art in Russia at that time, and the women were right up there and right part of it. And why it happened, I don't know, because women then went back to their old status after that period. But then, of course, art also went back to its very few dealers that carry this kind of work. So that, that's where I sought these things out. There was a dealer in Germany, for instance. And you write cold to a dealer and you get no place. He gave me the name of Brzezinski, was the leading in gallery. I remember writing to them and saying I had a John Travolta, and then the meeting and suggested I write them. What did they have to offer me? Well, they offered me just the worst looking picture I ever saw. I was just angry when I saw it. This would be a nice compliment to your collection. So somehow you have to establish yourself as a serious collector, and they have to kind of know what you're doing before you really can find these things.
Should artists approach you?
They do, and I'm very uncomfortable with this. First place, I think that I like to have some distance. If I go to an artist studio, I feel, I'm here looking at these children, these people, these productions. If I don't like what they're doing, I can't do nothing like that. I can't spend the time I want to get some distance between what I might like and might not like. If I go to a gallery in Des Moines, for instance, I go to some Martin Gallery, and I see the work of an artist, even though I might know her and could go directly, I can deal with the gallery. I can say, if you get something better, let me know, or I like this thing, can I take it home and try it for a while? And I just think that it's, I know that it's a much more satisfactory way of doing it. It really puts a collector on the spot to have an artist approach, because it means, I'm doing good work and buy something. You don't like to hurt people's feelings, and you don't want to just take a perfect stranger and go in and look at their work and make a judgment that way. So I think anybody who wants to market pictures really needs to do it through exhibitions, not only through dealers, but shows like the Artist Show, Octagon Gallery, any places where art is shown. I think is the way to get you what's known, and people can then evaluate it without just getting personally involved with whatever issues might be in that area.
Brenda, as an artist, how do you successfully place your art in commercial galleries as well as museums, and how do you choose them? How do you make perhaps value judgments on where you want to be seen, and then how do you go about it?
Museums are a little difficult, but I can talk a little bit about galleries. I think in a museum, excuse me, someone who's really they're there, they're standing, about it. In a gallery, you would do research, and that's extremely important for young artists. We're going to talk about young artists. Older artists have been more established, it's a different story. Galleries specialize in certain aspects of art. Contemporary art, modern art. They can deal with printmaking, painting, prints, graphics. It just depends. You need to do a lot of research. In your local galleries, say for instance, Olsen and Larson's galleries are wonderful galleries. The Octagon here. But you need slides. You need to meet these people. Maybe East Coast would be Tuesday, Wednesdays. I think Thursdays are good days to bring in slides. You need to call for an appointment. You need to have a vita or a small resume or something that would indicate your training. And that would be age, your birthday, if you have any educational training, etc. You could use that. But you need good slides, professional slides. You're going to have to you need a nice portfolio. They would prefer that than for you to bring in the work. If you live close by, after you make the initial contact with a letter or a phone call, then you should actually maybe bring in some work, and don't make it a variety. Come in, if you're a printer, bring in prints. 6 to 10 pieces would be, I think, sufficient. If you're a painter, which can be a little difficult if you paint as large as I paint, you may need slides, but you may need to bring in some work so that you can really view it. Now, I think that's extremely important that you do realize that galleries do specialize and you look for that, but you look in your hometown. You're a young artist, you have to get started. You go, you can, this is just for galleries. For museums, again, I will say this, I think they really reach people that are pretty well established. And you can enter shows like the Iowa Annual is another show that you can reach into. But it's very art galleries, they'll go to galleries and select people or collectors, and collectors will go and suggest the person to be shown at that museum. It's a little bit different. But for you that are just getting out slides, a resume, something, or just a little line stating who you are, what you've done, and a phone call. And looking. Don't just settle for one gallery. Look, they will take from 40 to 50% commission of your work if you get in. There's other galleries you can actually go into a co-op with a group of people. I would suggest that you go in and pay. Be careful about that. Someone tells you, well, I want you to pay me for this space. It's another story. You can do it. Don't get me wrong, it's been done. But that's an option. A lot of galleries, very new galleries in the village in New York, around that on the East Coast, have actually set up co-ops. People have just paid for the space they have. But you don't get museums, and you don't get the real heavy-duty collectors, etc., to come in to look at the work as regularly at the galleries like O.K. Harris in New York, or Warrenboro, or something like that, or even Olsen Lawson galleries. You really do need to get someone that's pretty established.
Jessica, you want to talk about how museums select artists and exhibitions, perhaps about policies relate to that, and then how should an artist approach museum staff, just to make them aware?
Well, in the case of museums, there is a mission statement. There's a focus generally each museum would have. For example, the Des Moines Art Center focuses on exhibiting significant work of art of our time. And the staff, the curatorial staff, the director who holds the role of chief curator pursues that area. There are a variety of ways works come in. Most of the time it comes in with slides, or else it's the director or the curator go out into the community doing studio visits, going to different exhibitions, gallery exhibitions, wherever art is shown. And I think working in a museum maybe is a little different in that because it's of an educational purpose that we seek out issues, trying to place issues of contemporary importance to the public. It's not always the end all for acquisition. And I think with that, it allows staff members to have probably a little more freedom to get to know the works because of the charge of research. With works coming in, I think to stress terrific slides. I mean, sometimes with wonderful work that's not represented well, you just don't quite get beyond that. And I think most people look at slides first, they credentials second. Certainly an exhibition record of some sort. And I think to establish that early on, and things which Brenda mentioned, competitive shows to enter to gain a record. With regard to policies with acquisitions,
Talk a little bit about the difference between exhibitions and then the policy for acquisitions. You say one doesn't necessarily make or the other one.
In the case of, again, I'll just talk about two institutions I'm most familiar with. With both of those, there was a sincere effort in interpretation, in finding diversity within an exhibition format, program. And generally, again, it's somewhat driven by the amount you have budgeted to spend every year. But for planning several major or a couple of major shows and then other exhibitions, which would have some documentation to it. Sometimes you have much more freedom in what you exhibit than what you collect. And I think collections, which are the heart of a museum, tend to have a very specific focus. Louise happens to be on our acquisitions committee and could talk about that, but we collect really a focus on post-1945 art from that period, but also 19th and 20th century. And part of that is a philosophy, and part of that is a precedent, which has been established and made into a policy. We don't collect some photography. It's only looked at on a case-by-case basis. Most of it is painting and sculpture. There are some tribal works that are collected, and we don't collect decorative arts. We don't collect textile. One of the reasons in the past to justify that was the really trying to build a collection, to make some comprehension, to some meaning between the objects when they're on display, and realizing that we can't have an encyclopedic collection. We also do works on paper, which is probably the only encyclopedic area, which I think we begin from the 16th century up to contemporary time. But otherwise, it's really a focus on 20th century.
I wanted to add that,
Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say there are a couple of other things, avenues for our young artists in museums. Many museums have rental and sales galleries where they sell, have carry generally local artists, and these are, there's Creed, but they are getting socialized at the Winter Center Institute. They gave up that part of the carry several years ago. Then there's also occasionally the Fine Arts Center will have a collector's choice exhibit. I've done some really very nice small things through, not so small sometimes, through those collector's choice exhibits, where the director will select from throughout the country works that are, quote, reasonably priced that the local collectors can choose from, which is wonderful because if you live in Des Moines, you're not aware of what's going on in New York or other places. And this brings a lot of work to your attention that you wouldn't see otherwise.
And that's a wonderful way for local collections to be built, not only for people to educate themselves, but it just then creates a whole activity that's supportive for the museum. Brenda?
Yes, I wanted to go too, before we go too far away from the exhibitions. There are jury shows that you can't enter, and some places are alternative places published by the NEA. You have American Art Dictionary, you have American Council for Artists, American Art Diary. There's a lot of different methods of going about trying to figure out how to get into these exhibitions, to get established enough for a record to get into museums. Jury shows is the one thing that you must remember. Again, you've got to be selective. So you need to read a little bit about the jury. What the background, because these people, no matter how much you want to say it isn't true, they have this set idea, this particular idea of what they like about art. Now, usually we'll get 2,000 entries, 200 will get in around the country. That's a lot. It is expensive. You have to pay from $7, I think, to $15 to $25. If it's international, it can be national, regional, international. Very important that you understand this, because it's a method of getting known. It isn't, I don't think that it is probably fair, and a lot of people will probably argue with me on this one, but it is, because it is, there's a bias here when it comes to these type of shows, and because you have people that may only do abstract art, non-objective art, minimalist art, etc. You will have a problem if you enter that show and you're figurative, realistic, or photorealist. That could be a separation for you. So you need to understand that about jury shows, but it is a method of getting in. And there's a lot of information, and I do have a couple of sheets that I would like for you, if you'd like to know. And also some places in New York, art news, magazines, will excellent. In the back of them, you can find exhibitions and shows for young artists that are just beginning to emerge.
I'd like to give you a couple of statistics that kind of were very significant for me. A year or two ago, I heard the editor of Art in America, and this is for all of the young artists out there. He said that in each issue of Art in America, there will be about 500 artists mentioned, either through visual reproduction or discussion in their articles, however it may be. And if you take out the Motherwells and the Degas, etc., 10 of those artists will be presented again in Art in America. There's an awful lot of artists out there in that world, and Brenda's point of being persistent and being sure that you keep that contact with your galleries and museums is very important. The Bernier on campus is a very small museum, and every day we will probably get packages from anywhere from 8 to 12 artists each day. Now, we don't present that many shows, but that's an awful lot of material to go through. And truly, what we may not select an artist for one area, maybe want to hear from them again later on. So don't give up on those institutions, be it a commercial facility or a museum. Be in touch. A lot of the artists that survive, I think, are persistent. So don't allow that to get away. I wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of combining teaching and art opportunities and education, and looking from that from personal enrichment, from institutional enrichment, and then from Brenda, once you talk about your teaching on the university level.
This is something that I must tell you that I studied under Jules Kirschenbaum at Drake, and at Oklahoma University I studied under a man called Joe Hobbs. Two people that, because they were men, and I had lived my whole life with a woman artist from the time I was 7 until that period. It was very stern. This is what you do. And on the other hand, she was telling you, you've got to do this to be able to create this imagery and to be able to create your art. What I'm telling you is that there's a balance between creativity and the fundamentals of art. And to me, it is extremely important that young artists understand that there are labels, and I will not tell you that this isn't true. You may want to just do what you want to do. That's fine. But you shouldn't be at a university. You should be up in the guilds and guilds arts. And because we call that naive art, no, excuse me, I take that back. We call it folk art. Someone who hasn't been trained. Primitive art would be Giotto, Cimabue. These are people that are religious art, oceanic, African art would be considered this type of art. When you walk into a university, I had a person at the University of Michigan ask me in an interview once, what would you do if you had this student who was incredible? Just really incredible. What would you do with this student? And I looked at him and I was as honest as I could be. For me, as a teacher, I would tell him there is nothing wrong with understanding the fundamentals. That's just a little bit about line, shape, value, tone. So that the left side could feed the right side of the brain because he's at a university. To keep him from making that accident and not knowing what to do with that accident once it's done. And I think that's extremely important in teaching. That you're not just here to use up the space. Rent the space. The time that you're here, use it. You won't lose anything. If you're truly creative, it's truly in you to be an artist. It's only a matter of taking a little bit more information. I have told students this, I think a genius comprehends maybe 500 times quicker than an A+ student. An A+ student, a little bit quicker than an A. So on, so on. But I think if you can make a C, you can make a B. I don't think it's impossible to do that. You can turn it around. It's just a matter how much you want to enter into your work, how much you want that, how much you want to give back. But you've got to balance it on a professional level. A university is not an open studio for you just to take free time to do what you want to. You have that creative instinct. And there's different methods of doing it. I have a lot of little tricks to turn it around. But I also tell students, excuses, you may want to write this one down, are the tools of insufficiency. They do a monuments of nothingness, and those who dwell upon them are seldom good for anything else. It's just another excuse not to do it right. Why would you have a head in proportion and the figure not in proportion, and I keep looking at it, your piece is fragmented. I can go up to it and put something into that piece. There's a problem there. This is where I come in. They tell you, let's correct this. It's still your hand. I'm not going to touch your drawing. I'm not going to touch your painting. But it's wrong because I can take it out. And you can stand there and argue from here to glory. Well, why are you here? Why do you want to be in this environment? Because this is a learning environment. This is an institution. Creativeness comes from within. And no one can take that away. Michelangelo learned, Picasso learned, Augustus Savage. I don't know anyone who isn't great. They didn't learn from someone or something. Unless you live in a vacuum, and I don't know anyone that can live in a box without light. So it is extremely important for me as a teacher to balance or to help you with your creativity and not to take away from your individuality either. I will never do that. And I think that if you've ever been in one of the classes with me, if you know any of the students, they will tell you that. Do not take away from your creativity. We enhance it.
the Des Moines Arts Center balance the art and the education program. The Art Center has one of the best museum education, not the best museum education program in the state. Can you talk about that balance?
Well, the museum sometimes is looked at as a visual library, a learning resource, introducing new unfamiliar material and works of art to students. Within the museum, we have 12 departments, and one of those is the education department. It has a very active studio program. We have about 25 faculty members and 2 visiting artists, which provide residency and have on-site studio space. And the idea is to excite the public, and the public by that I mean we offer classes from 3.5-year-olds to adult on learning not only how to create a work, a painting, a print, a work in clay, but also how come, why, and that's how they we've tried to mesh the programs with the collection. So the collection is used as a resource very closely in those activities. It's an ongoing process, and I think education, if the collection is the heart of what a museum or an institution is, the education programs are the spirit, what makes it come alive, what makes it meaningful.
Louise, you've been a mentor to many people, and I was interested in asking you about the educational role of a mentor that you've collected and how you've helped others make art an opportunity. Or maybe that.
I don't think that.
You don't think so?
But I was thinking, we talked about how to succeed in being an artist. You go back to the 19th century, the French Impressionists, nobody appreciated them, but you look at the exhibits that those people were entered into, the national exhibits, there may be 2,000 or 3,000 pictures of them. And you have no idea how many artists along the way did not survive. The few that we know of, we think, well, that was the 19th century. I think that everybody who is going into the creative art field has to realize that if it's a man or a woman, this is a very competitive field. That it's a field that not only takes perseverance, but you have to have an extra something that helps you get along, and don't be too discouraged if you find a lot of roadblocks. There are a lot of people looking.
I'd like to open it up now for questions that you may have of the panel in the last few minutes. Yes?
I'd like to know, the Brunier Gallery, how far ahead of their show do you have?
How far ahead of what?
How far ahead do you schedule shows?
Oh, exhibitions are regularly scheduled 2 to 5 years. It's sometimes even longer than that. Right now we have things up in 97. So it varies, but it's solid for the next 2 years. That's another reason for artists not to give up. Oftentimes, especially young artists will come in and say, I have my work and it's out in my car. And really wanting a very immediate response, and most museums are not prepared for that. Sometimes we'd like to, sometimes I'd love to have a gallery that was sitting there for the show that we hadn't found before, and it's a wonderful show. We don't have that luxury. Yes?
I have another question. This question is from Brenda. I agree with your approach about teaching, that you have to learn the traditional methods. You have to learn the craft, the technique, to work with color, line, shape, etc. But what do you think about the school structure now? Do you think this school structure that we have, the system, functions really well beyond maybe 2 years of learning technique, 2 or 3 years of learning technique? After that, would you consider that then the opposite approach may be, and that is to foster as much individuality as you can in your students once they learn this thing called technique?
Well, I think because art is so diverse, and you have, with this, you're going to have a variety of people teaching courses. Someone that was actually just taught just basic abstraction, that's just expressive type of work. With me, it was a different story. I began to look at shape, composition, line, value, etc., perspective. So now, how do I introduce that into the classroom without having it to become boring? What you end up doing is trying to find subject matter or make it very flat for the student.